All right. So welcome, Dr. Don. I appreciate you taking the time. Today we're going to talk about TBI, which stands for traumatic brain injury. And you've been very open and candid with your story, experiencing a TBI yourself. So I'd love to hear from you, who you are, a little bit about yourself, and how you experienced a TBI.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I always look forward to ways to spread the word about the impact that TBI can have on individuals. And currently, I'm retired and enjoying it. I would recommend it highly. I live out in the woods, and I enjoy that as well. But the reason we're here today is because way back when, right in towards the latter part of my medical practice, I had a fall and hit my head pretty hard. And while I didn't have a cracked skull or anything that was evidenced on CT scans or MRIs, I had some damage to processing in my brain. And during a active medical career, that was quite challenging. It forced me into different behavior modes to try to minimize the impact of the disabilities I was feeling. It affected relationships, basically in a very positive way over time. It assaulted my priorities to some degree. It was quite challenging, and it took me quite a few years to get in a place of comfort after initially feeling a lot of loss and grief and uncertainty. So I wanted to tell the story to people that who don't resolve within the first 6 weeks to 3 months, that there is hope even after that, but it's a long journey sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And when people hear traumatic brain injury or TBI, there's a big spectrum. There's what people consider more like a mild TBI, then there's more severe TBIs. Some TBIs cause lasting damage. Some seem to resolve in a shorter amount of time. Can you walk us through your fall and when you realized that your fall had caused more than just a physical pain?
Well, I had I was a runner. That's one of the things I had to kind of change. I couldn't continue to run. I kept trying, but I couldn't. And I happened to run down a wet walkway in a rainstorm. Um, my feet slipped out in front of me and it catapulted my head back onto the walkway, and I hit the back of my head bluntly and squarely on this wooden walkway. Uh, I, I was out a little bit. I don't know much about that. I just know when I came back inside, I was pretty wet after being rained on. And I know, your nature as a human being is to try to minimize anything and say, I'm fine, let's keep going. I'd also hurt my back with that fall. And so the next day, I'm trying to run a half marathon with a friend. And between my head symptoms and my back symptoms, that just wasn't happening that day. My wife and I were walking around shopping, and uh, I had a problem with remembering her birthday. And we'd been married for over 40 years at that time, and that just wasn't something that I should have problems with. But I really knew something was strange in my head about 3 weeks later. And I think that's one thing people don't necessarily realize is the symptoms they have in the first 24, 48, 72 hours don't tell the whole story. Some of those symptoms develop over a period of weeks afterwards. And so this was 3 weeks later, and I was driving from my home, which was in the southwest tip of Georgia, to Brunswick, which is basically towards the southeast corner of Georgia. I was driving by myself, and I was pulled up to stoplights, and the road kept crawling on in front of me. And I would know the road wasn't moving, but it was moving in my eyes. Um, I would pass mailboxes along the road, and if they were colorful, I I would not pay attention to them as I was passing them. But when I got close to them and caught them in my peripheral vision, then I would have the image that maybe that was somebody standing there, and I'd almost hit them driving so close to
Mm.
them. That was very disconcerting. And then when I see further in the review mirror, I'd realize it was just this mailbox. But my perceptual filter from my periphery was just all altered. And it was very disconcerting, very worrisome,
Mhm.
uh, very, just made me, well, what's next? What is
Right.
happening? Am I having a problem with my mental health or a problem with my brain health? And they both come from the same area, but they're not the same thing.
Hmm.
Um, so that it left me in a really challenged position at that point. And of course, I also knew that by the time I got to Brunswick, in about 3 days, I was going to have to drive back to Bainbridge, and that really kind of concerned me after what I experienced on the journey east. To then realize I was going to have to do it on the journey west
Wow.
as well.
And at this time, you're a practicing OBGYN, you're a marathon runner, and you experience this fall. Now you're starting to have some actual sort of complications from this fall. At this point, did you realize, hey, I might have actually hurt my brain when I had that fall a few weeks ago?
No, that didn't really enter into my mind, but apparently I was having some trouble with um, I'm blanking on the term now. When you turn your eye to the side and it bounces.
Oh, like nystagmus?
Yeah, I was having trouble with nystagmus
Mhm.
because it was about 3 weeks afterwards as well when I went to the orthopedist because my back was bothering me, and the orthopedist said, there's something wrong with you, and it's not your back. Your back will be fine. I need to get you to the neurologist." And he's the one that actually said there's something organically that needs to be assessed, and you need to see a neurologist about that.
Wow.
And that's kind of also when, reality hit a little bit more.
Okay, so at that point, then you go to the neurologist, and when you received a diagnosis, what what happened after that? Because I'm sure that there is a bit of a period of grief of losing certain abilities that you maybe were able to do in the past, such as running. And how did you navigate this emotionally?
Well, the doctor, did try to help me, and he put me on several medicines. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't the first visit, but since I was having trouble with remembering and processing things, he even put me on a medication for Alzheimer's disease at that
Mm.
point, which will get your attention as well. But as opposed to what you said, the grief took a long time for me. It wasn't something that I passed over quickly. I wanted the old me back. I didn't want the new me that had to sit in a chair on Saturday morning in the dark for hours to just try to let the pressure in my head settle down and get better. I didn't want the headaches. I didn't want the instability when I went to run. So I grieved and I got angry to some degree. I went through all those states of loss that Dr.
Mhm.
Kubler-Ross talked about. And getting over death of a loved one. But um, it, it it took a while for me to resolve that in a positive way. And when you have a job and you have a career, you get up the next day and you start fighting again. So that's what I did, and I didn't just wallow in pity or pain, but it was a daily battle to maintain that positivity because it was a fight.
Absolutely. And for other people out there that have experienced something similar to what you experienced, what advice would you give to people feeling this sense of loss, whether they're experiencing loss over a TBI or something different?
I think the most important thing is to have a support person,
Hmm.
somebody that you can be honest with, somebody who you can trust to give you some feedback. Because at times in this struggle, and I'm sure in other struggles, as you mentioned, uh, the person that's struggling gets a little confused, uh, maybe gets misdirected, and somebody that you have a confidence in can help kind of push you back in the right direction or add a note of cheerfulness or
Hmm.
um, be helpful in one way or another. It's also very important to get professional help. Um, Someone who can help guide you, who's seen this before and knows about it.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, even though I found a good neurologist to help manage my symptoms, I never really got yeah, I've seen patients suffering this 30 times before. It was,
Hmm.
I wanted somebody to say, yeah, that's all due to the TBI. You're not going nuts, and we need to work through this. And I never really got that validation so much
Hmm.
that I needed to say, okay, we're in this battle together.
Hmm.
We're going to work on it and help you.
Hmm. Yeah, I can understand how that can be frustrating. What sort of practical strategies did you implement during this time, and maybe still today, that really helped you adapt to life after your TBI?
Well, one of those strategies was even though I couldn't run, if I could walk instead of driving, I didn't have to deal with the movement disturbance so much.
Hmm.
So I would try to walk places instead of driving to places. That was one thing I did. And the book I wrote, there's a picture in there of my wife and I walking on the beach, and there was a particular way I could hold her arm where our forearms were against each other, and that was a much more stable kind of reinforcement to
Hmm.
me uh, when we would walk. Because initially, the beach was just very intimidating. I'm a beach lover, been there since a kid, but all those slopes and ups and downs and the water crashing and the wind blowing, I didn't have the filters at that point to be able to block some of that out. And it was a real struggle to handle all that various input walking
Hmm.
down the beach. And then there was avoidance. I needed more rest. And so I cut back on community events like community festivals or concerts, even shopping malls were areas that were very difficult for me, and so I avoided those areas of stimulation.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow. You mentioned your book, so Doctor Undaunted. Can you walk me through a little bit about your decision to write a book and what that process of actually writing down your experience was like for you?
Yeah, writing it down, that's a traumatic experience in and of itself because you tend to summarize what all you've been through. But I was after my injury out, like I told you, I was trying to figure out do other people have these same experiences?
Hmm.
Are other people dealing with this, what's happening in my head phenomena? How much of this is brain injury and or have I just gone off the deep end? What is going on in my head? And I had a very difficult time finding answers. I've got books I've purchased that other doctors have written who've been through traumatic brain injury. I was doing my research, et cetera, and it was just really difficult to find much validation through other people's stories. And I thought, well, that's just not right. I mean, this is real. And if I can't find voices that make me feel better, maybe I can be a voice that will make somebody else feel better.
Hmm.
So writing the book was my tithe back, I guess, to try and help other people that have been through the experience and are looking for answers as to the great question of has anybody ever felt this before?
Right.
Um,
And after writing that book, were you comforted in that other people reached out to you, or uh, that maybe you found community in, whether they were doctors who experienced TBIs, or really anyone who experienced TBIs? Do you find that sense of community that you're not alone?
I have found that to some degree. Unfortunately, the book has not been as successful as I would have liked for it to be, not from a financial standpoint, but just from a standpoint of getting it into the hands of people that could benefit from it. But it's been amazing to see people come out of the woodwork and say, you know, I had something like that 10 years ago and I never could
Mm.
figure it out. Now I understand what was happening to me.
Mm. Wow.
Or my spouse has been through this and now I know better how to talk to them about it.
Hmm.
So yeah, I got positive feedback from people who read the story and realized the struggle and identified with it.
Oh, that's great. Your story reflects an ability to find joy despite limitations. As I talk to you now, I see that you are a generally happy person, and you've been able to overcome so much in your life. How do you maintain such a positive perspective?
Well, I look at it, part of it is genetic. That's just kind of the way I was made.
Mhm.
Excuse me. Part of it was, again, being career focused and knowing you had to go out the door the next morning.
Mhm.
So you try to make the best of it. I think one of the things is that, you know, at this point and at the time when I wrote the book, I could look back and I could say, well, wow, this has taken this many years. But when I was going through it, particularly early on, I didn't know if today it was going to be all better. I
Right.
didn't know it was going to last years. I thought it was just going to resolve itself, or the medicine would control it, or I would be fully functional. So I didn't start the day thinking, "Oh God, what's going to happen today?" I would start the day thinking, "Well, maybe I'll be better today." So
Mhm.
that was joyful. I had a daughter living at home who was very encouraging back then. And I found that my struggling through these physical alterations did a lot to strengthen my spiritual life and my faith. And so I found more joy in my faith to kind of compensate for some of the physical losses.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it sounds like there's been so much resilience building throughout this experience. Does that sound like what you've experienced?
Just somewhere along the way, you have to quit wanting it to be back like it was,
Hmm.
and you have to start looking for how it can be. And so, yes, resilience, but nobody's going to be happy if they stay in loss mode the rest of their days, whether it's physical capabilities or loss of a loved one or um, financial loss. Somewhere you kind of have to draw the line and start living for tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And last question for you. You know, you're a physician and you're someone who's experienced a TBI firsthand. How do you think that the medical community can better support patients dealing with long-term effects of brain injuries?
Yeah, I've thought about that all along the way since I started thinking about writing the book. And today's medical care is so chopped up into you got a specialist for this and a specialist for that, and you got 10 minutes allotted for this appointment and 10 minutes for that. Uh, I really think that the best thing a primary care physician could do or a neurologist could do is help to organize a support group, um, either in the local community, if it's a bigger community, or um, like we're doing today on Zoom, where people could talk about, and you, especially on Zoom, you can just say, "My name's Don." You don't have to say, "I'm Don Robinson. I live in Georgia." You can just start talking and be open and, um, well, how was your last week? And what did you run through? Man, I ran through that too. I think that would be so very helpful to know that there is a community of people that are just as challenged as you are. It works in other areas. I think it would work together in a group where reality's been somewhat distorted and people need to be able to kind of come to terms with that and deal with it and understand it.
Absolutely agree. There's so much value in having people who have gone through similar situations be able to voice what they experience, and we find that we're not so alone in what we experience. So I love
Indeed.
that answer. Dr. Don, I really appreciate you taking the time. This is going to be really helpful for anyone who has ever experienced a TBI, or so many of us have family members that also have experienced TBIs as well. So I really want to thank you so much for taking the time today.
Well, thank you. And thank you. Thanks to the UBA. I reached out to them early on and um, I had sent out a letter to several different groups. And it seems like I remember having a phone call with Jay, the director, and I was going to offer to send them a book, and he said they already bought one. They were reading it, so I was impressed with that. And he is just such a good guy, and so I've had a good relationship over time with the people at UBA. And thank you for the helmets. That's such a wonderful thing. And say hey to Jay and Lacey for me, and if I can help you in any other way, reach out.
Will do. Thank you so much, Dr. Don.
Have a great day.